Welcome everyone to this webinar on centering. How come I can't remember the title? We're off to a great start. Grounding and presence. Centering, grounding, and presence. I chose this topic because I had met with a number of clients that I found their center of their personal energy, the energy that I identify as them, is as opposed to some functional part of them. It's like the core of their being, their essence. And that energy was not centered in their body, primarily in the heart region. And that's where it normally would be. And these particular clients, their energy was elsewhere. And in fact, in several of them, the energy was actually outside of their body. And in a couple, it was actually quite remote. It was a great distance away from their body. And both of those particular people had had rather serious trauma in their lives. And so it became apparent that when a person has been subjected to trauma to varying degrees, either minor trauma or something much more significant, then what happens sometimes is that their core energy gets displaced from where it's naturally supposed to sit in the heart and is pushed away to some distance. And I think the degree of the trauma also contributes to the difficulty that I encounter in trying to get that core energy to move back into their body. That core energy is saying to me that the body is not a safe place for it to reside. It doesn't want to be in the body because that's a dangerous place to be. So it resides somewhere remotely, somewhere at some considerable distance from the body. And in some cases, what I find is that there are, you might say, pieces of that core energy located in more, in different places, 2 or 3 or 4 different places. And again, that seems to correlate to the degree of the intensity of the stress, the trauma that has occurred in their life. And fortunately, the people I've worked with were pretty much aware of what had happened to them. That is what the trauma was, something they had a memory of, but they felt lost. And the experience that those people have, some of the people describe it kind of the way I see it, which is that they don't feel like like they inhabit their body. They have this sense that they're somewhere else. They usually can't tell quite where that is. That's something that I'm able to pick up, but they don't always get that very, very clearly. But they get the sense that they're not really in their body, and particularly aware of that at times when they're feeling that there's something that reminds them of the trauma that they had experienced or the stress that they had been under. When I say trauma, that is not always like a traumatic event or maybe repeated traumatic events. It is sometimes living in an environment, particularly in the early childhood, and often in the very early childhood, and even in the womb, it can happen, that there's just ongoing stress. And it may be that the mother, in that case, in the womb, that the mother is living in a very stressful environment or feels that they're in danger or actually experiences some kind of assault, physical assault, or perhaps there's just like they're in a war situation. And then I had another client that it wasn't so specific that they were in a war situation, but the family feeling was as though they were in a war situation because of family history. They had been. And so there was the conveyed stress that the world is a dangerous place and that they always had to be vigilant and, in some sense, prepared for the worst. They had to be prepared for terrible things to happen. And that was a history of the family in which they had grown up. And I'm going to talk a lot more about that next month when on March 12th, we have a webinar on family bonds and family karma and how those energies carry the impacts of the family history. So that's just another example of how a kind of ongoing stress can produce a displacement of one's core energy from within the core of one's physical body. So again, back to the description, the feeling that people get often is that they unsettled. They just, it's as if they were afloat or adrift. So sometimes they feel like they don't own their body, they're not in their body. Sometimes they feel like they're adrift. They're not connected deeply with their body. The opposite, though, can also occur in my experience, and that is that they're extremely aware of their body and very, very protective of it. So they're the kind of people that you may see them, they don't stand up straight. If you look at them, they look anxious and like they're very vigilant about their environment, as though something was going to happen to them all the time. So that's another pattern that I see when people come in, and it's kind of fascinating to me how this unfolds in people, because they have no control over it. They have no ability to reintegrate that, even when they're quite aware that they aren't centered in their own being, their own physical body. And so they're, I used the word before, adrift. They're kind of adrift. There's no way that there's anything that they can do to make it better. And it's not particularly amenable to psychotherapy even, because it's so nonspecific in their experience that they can't put their finger on it. They can talk about the traumas that have occurred to them, but they really need help getting the energy that has been displaced back into their body. It's such a powerful influence that's occurred, and the memory of that and the memory of how they've dealt with it by displacing their energy. It's not a conscious thing, of course. It's just subconscious or unconscious. It just happens to them. And so it's really very difficult to restore the energy to the body. So that makes the kind of work that I do particularly gratifying, because in most cases, in a relatively short period of time, usually within one session, and sometimes literally within a few minutes, but the kind of cases I'm thinking of tonight, it's usually quite it's 20, 30, 40 minutes perhaps of work. And occasionally it's even more than one session. That is, it may be more than an hour, and we have to come back to it. One case I remember just recently, it was definitely not completely resolved at the end of the first session. But when they came for the second session, there had been further progress even when they weren't with me. And so the finishing it off actually only took a few minutes. So these kinds of things are fairly easily worked with, in a sense that, although I sometimes say it takes me a long time, this is work that basically would be lifelong work without the kind of work that I can do. So it's particularly gratifying for me to do it. And it's very gratifying, of course, for the clients, because they feel this tremendous sense of relief when their core energy, you could say their soul, but that's being a little grandiose about it. But it is their core energy when that reintegrates in their body, there's a tremendous sense of relief. There's a loss of attention that exists pretty much all the time, related to the fact that their core energy isn't in their body. So that has to do with centering. And when one is centered, there is that sense. You can tell when someone's centered because there's this feeling that they're right there in their body. And that's a subtle feeling. And if you're not thinking about it, you might not tune into it. But the next time you meet somebody who seems to be under some stress or has a history, you might just ask yourself, where do I feel them to be? Are they there right in front of me in their body? Or are they perhaps somewhere else? You may not be able to localize it, but you may at least get the sense that they're displaced. You can actually feel that. So that's centering. The next topic is grounding. And grounding is a very familiar term. People use it a lot. And it means being rooted, if you will, or at least upon the earth, and settled upon the earth, and settled upon something that is inherently stable. And I use that phraseology because one of the things I discovered when I was abroad, I was in actually a whole series of earthquakes, not very big ones, but just minor tremors. But when the earth moves, it's an extremely disturbing experience. You can get used to it, of course, like thunder and things like that. But when the earth moves, it's a very unsettling experience because one always expects the earth to be stable. Yeah, you may be walking on something like gravel or something, that is unstable, but the earth underneath it is solid. And so there's this sense energetically that one is grounded into literally the ground, into the earth. And when one loses that, it produces a great deal of anxiety. And again, stress is one of those things that causes us to lose that sense of grounding. But we can lose it in other ways too. They're all, in a sense, stressful, but moving around a lot, just traveling, can give one a sense of not being grounded because you are not like in deep contact with the earth. You're always rolling along. So traveling, particularly in a thing like a car, a motor vehicle, motorcycle, you have that sense that you're more in the air and you're more in motion. And so you're not deeply connected to the earth. Big changes in life can make one feel ungrounded. And that can include like loss of loved ones, or moving from one place to another, moving a home, a residence, or an office space, changing jobs. Things like that can be very ungrounding. There's a superficial psychological thing, obviously, which is that you're in a new environment, but there's this deeper thing about being in a new space. And if the space is very welcoming, physically welcoming, you're moving, for instance, in a vastu, you've moved into a vastu, that usually gives you very, very quickly will give you that sense of being grounded in the place that you are living or working. But if you move into a place that is a very poor vastu, that can be very, very unsettling in the sense of you lose your sense of being rooted in the environment in which you're living or working. So that's what is meant by grounding. Energetically, again, it means the energy is floating. You may still be centered, but you're not, that center of energy is not rooted, is not connected down into that which is solid beneath the earth. And so it is possible to distinguish these two things energetically. And the feeling, of course, is that a person may be in their body, they may dwell in their body, but it is not it's literally the energy is not rooted. It does not extend down into the earth. And of course, it also extends upward, but that's a whole other consideration. But it's not rooted necessarily. So centering and grounding are really two different things. And then the other thing that I have as the topic for discussion is the sense of presence, being present in the present moment. And what that means is that you are not time traveling in your mind. You're not in the past and you're not in the future. Future is, of course, like daydreaming, when the mind is entertaining thoughts about something that isn't real, it could possibly happen, that kind of thing. And then oftentimes people, of course, are carrying with them the impressions of the past that they're processing. So anytime they're not, specifically oriented to a task, and sometimes even when they are, the attention shifts back in time. And so they're not really present in the moment. Now, another way that that occurs, and it's something that I've noticed certainly in myself, is that sometimes something will happen. Either somebody will say something or some event will occur, some kind of situation. And I find myself reflecting on that. And it means that I withdraw from the situation that I'm in, and I'm just inside my own head. And I think everybody has that kind of experience at one time or another, and probably almost every day, at least momentarily, where there'll be something that occurs that you want to ponder at that moment. And so you shift from really being present. That often happens when people are talking to other, you're talking to someone else who's maybe right in front of you, and they'll say something, and you start thinking about, well, what does that mean? What are they trying to convey to me? What's their feeling? where are they coming from in this particular, and so those kind of thoughts are going on inside your head. And when that happens, particularly if it happens to somebody else that you're talking to, you get that sense that they're suddenly not really completely there. They may still be looking at you, and they might even be talking with you, back and forth. But you get that sense that at least part of their attention is diverted somewhere else, and you may not have much of a sense of what that is. For people who've had a lot of trauma, or had significant trauma, not necessarily a lot of it, but either way, the thing that happens is that it's very hard for them to show up in a conversation. They can talk, but when you're talking with them, you get that sense that they're not really there. They're not really present with you. They're kind of more somewhere else. And in situations where the relationship is particularly awkward, and that may have nothing to do with you, it may just be who they are, they may have difficulty looking you in the eye. They may have difficulty really expressing themselves. The conversation may be very superficial. They just won't go very deep into a conversation. And they may quickly find excuses or change the subject. I didn't complete that thought. They may quickly find excuses to leave or to, as I started to say, change the subject, or just have their attention somewhere else. And sometimes we think, oh, people are multitasking, and you kind of wonder, are they really paying attention to you, or do they really care? You get that feeling, maybe they don't really care about me or what I'm thinking, or about my being there with them, because they're so wrapped up in themselves at the time. And they're still perfectly functional in terms of, being able to navigate within the environment, but they're not really with you. And when that happens in a relationship and over a chronic period of time, one gets the feeling that they have just withdrawn from the relationship. They're still there, and they may still have a conversation with you or otherwise engage with you, but you have the feeling that they're not really completely there. And it can be very severe, or it can be just kind of a mild level of not being really present in the moment. Again, oftentimes it's because people have such impressions from the past that those impressions are shaping the way they can participate in the present moment, and being in a relationship. And that obviously affects intimacy, their capacity to really connect with someone. And that may show up on the level of the intellect, may show up on the level of the heart. So it's, the intellect is the level in which people engage, having a conversation, talking stuff through. On the level of the heart, it's that fine feeling level that's going on between people. And then, of course, on the level of the physical body, I had an opportunity, I won't use the name here, but I had an opportunity to meet a politician recently. And usually when you meet politicians, there's a very high, really good level of communication on the surface level. They're very friendly. They remember names. They chat amicably. But you get the feeling that, they do this, 100 times a day, day after day, and they kind of going through emotions, but they're not really connecting with you. But I happened to meet a politician recently, and there was this great sense of sincerity and presence in the person that really surprised me. I was very, very delighted, actually. And I noticed it wasn't just me, that as they chatted with different people, that they really connected with the person that they were talking to. They looked them right in the eye. They even put a hand on the other person's arm. And there was this sense that there was no hurry about the conversation, that we would chat and we would complete whatever it was that had come up and try to give a very sincere and personal kind of answer to it. But it was the sense of personal presence that really struck me. And it made me feel that it made me feel confident in that particular politician, which is not something I often feel in politicians. It made me feel confident that what they said came from a very deep place within them, and that they were very much in touch with their values and what they were trying to do, and knowing who they were and what they wanted for the people that they would represent. So it's a wonderful thing, and it's very hard to, I think it's hard to describe that in a politician. It's not a quality we usually talk about with people. Sometimes I think of the videos that I saw of Barack Obama when he was talking about not just political issues, but more personal stuff. And just that sense that he was a very real person and very present with people. And it's a very different kind of thing than, say, I can't think of the president now. Bill Clinton, I guess, would be one I might name. Hope I don't get into trouble for this. But thinking about him, he was very, very good with people. But there was always the sense I got from watching videos of him that he was always the politician, that he was very careful about what he said. He was very smooth, so he didn't convey like, I'm thinking about what I'm going to say to you. He could just talk. But they always had that feeling that he was the politician. He was presenting an image that he wanted to project rather than projecting himself and being really true to himself. And that may not be entirely fair. And I certainly never met him in person. And I think it's something that you pick up better when you do meet somebody in person, and you can have a chance to actually, visit with them, and just see, can they shift from that level of just superficial conversation, like any other conversation they're going to have that day with 100 different people, or do you really get the sense that they're right there with you? Are they present? And so presence has an energetic equivalent, that is the presence that a person, puts out as they're connecting with other people. And that is that that energy is right there in their body and is accessible and is not hidden by the energetic changes that have come about from impressions of past experience and family things and all the other stuff that goes on that influences the way energy projects. So presence is, you might say, the result of being centered and grounded, but it's one more quality, and that quality is that there's no covering over the core being. That core being is just projected through. And in some sense, that represents a level of consciousness that that people can sense, even if you can't see the energy. You just get the feeling that, wow, this person is really right there, and they are who they are. I know who this person is. And then, you know, I either resonate with that or I don't resonate with that, but or some degree of resonance with that. But it's something that you can really feel or really pick up. So that's what I wanted to say about centering, grounding, and resonance. And I'm going to just check my chat here. Looks like it's okay. Okay. So if there are any questions, I try to see, let me see if I can unmute everybody simultaneously. And if I can't, then we'll do it. Well, I'm just going to click through. I'm unmuting each of you, trying to. Wish I didn't have to do this. Okay. So if anybody wants to say anything or ask any questions, this would be a good time. Good. So everybody is unmuted from what I can see. So if you have anything or any question you want to ask, I'll be happy to entertain.
This Dr. Sands, this is George.
Okay, George.
You were saying about the body being out of the place, away from energy, away from the body.
Right.
And I just want to work, what kind of places would it be? A bunch of places.
It's not kinds of places. It's like just where it's located. Is it inside the body, someplace, but not in the center, not in the heart area, the heart space? Or is it even outside the body in one of the layers of the subtle body? Or has it moved even a great distance? And it's striking to me, and one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this tonight was that sometimes the core energy can be displaced a very great distance. When that happens, then, as I said, it's a little more work to get it to come back in, because whatever it was that made it move so far away is very powerful, and that needs to be worked with.
Now, like when it's so far away, what kind of power distance, miles or feet, or in another continent?
I certainly never measured the distance. I would say many yards at least away, you know. The way it shows up to me is just like, it's either a little ways away, a little further away, or way, way away. And it's like I say, I don't try to measure it. It's just like, oh, wow, that's way out there.
Not in another country.
Well, maybe.
Overseas.
Maybe. Very good. It's a nice question, George. Thank you. Anybody else have a question? Very good. So I'm going to